Hi, welcome to Openly Aging with Allison. I'm glad you're here. This is the place where we talk about the elephant in the room, aging. But it's your journey, and we do it with intention, control, and purpose. And today I am so excited for our guest. I met Hunter while we were both attending the Duke Caregiver event back in the fall. And as soon as I came across their table, if you will, I knew immediately when I started my YouTube channel that I needed him to come on as a guest. So I want to welcome Hunter Beattie with Enswell Funeral Home. And all right, so he has a funeral home, no big, difference there. But what really intrigued me is Hunter and Enswell provide a service called Aquamation, which I had never heard about before. So we are going to dive right in to getting to know Hunter, getting to know Enswell, and learn a little bit more about this new service called Aquamation. So, Hunter, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah, so tell us, I mean, we need the origin story. How did
Sure.
we get into the funeral home business?
Yeah, so Veronica and I have no background in the funeral industry, and it's not something we ever talked about high school, college, any conversations together while traveling, like, oh, let's open up a funeral home. This really came out of nowhere. I was sitting in a cemetery or next to a cemetery in January 2022, just waiting on a friend who lived nearby. And I'm doom scrolling. I'm looking at all the bad news in the world, probably intentionally. I don't know if you're aware of the doom scrolling phenomenon. It's like a projection of inner turmoil. You're reading
100%.
about the
Dopamine, it's like a mess. Yeah.
yeah, it's the Thwaites Doomsday Glacier that's going to raise sea levels by 3 feet, and or the Cascadian subduction zone that's going to have an earthquake, and then the Pacific Northwest will be inundated by a tsunami. And it's like, why am I gravitating towards that? But then I stumble upon this article about Desmond Tutu, former Archbishop of Cape Town, Nobel Prize winner, anti-apartheid activist. He chose aquamation after he died. And like you, I never heard of Aquamation before. But I'm sitting next to the cemetery, and as I'm reading the article about unsustainable modern funeral practices, I'm looking at the cemetery and realizing that all the flowers are plastic. I am, for the first time, contemplating this practice of preserving dead people, placing them in non-biodegradable caskets, placing those into concrete burial vaults right in the middle of our towns and cities that are experiencing an affordable housing crisis. And when I looked around the cemetery, I realized that the majority of people living around it weren't even related to the people who were buried there. It was just cut off from any productive use, from kids playing, from dogs catching a ball or pooping. You can't let your dog poop in a cemetery. What does the community do as demographic changes push away the people who are related to the people buried there? So all of these articles presented an alternative to this modern funeral industry that is often seen as predatory, extractive, unsustainable, and bad for the environment. And those alternatives were aquamation and green burial. So my mind was blown. I went home, I talked to Veronica, and 2 weeks later, we put a deposit on a $300,000 Aquamation machine without any idea where we were going to put it, no name for the business or website or business plan. We never wrote a business
Is
plan.
that very common of you to find this idea and
Yeah,
then just
yeah.
like go for it?
Yeah, totally. Veronica wrote it off. She dismissed it as just another one of Hunter's dumb
Yeah.
ideas. Like she thought she would find me looking at school buses, used school buses, and on eBay, and ask me what I'm doing with them or why I'm looking at them. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to convert it into a mobile plant store slash coffee shop. Great idea, kind
Yeah.
of, right? Not
Yeah.
super profitable, but really romantic. So there were dozens of ideas like this over our 10-year marriage. And,
Yeah. But I would
you know,
probably
but,
say
but
Aquamation is probably probably the cherry on top with like the
yeah, I
crazy.
mean, to
Yeah.
be honest, like we pursued many of them. We ended up quitting our jobs at a nonprofit and backpacking all over the
Yeah.
world. We lived in a camper van in the pandemic. So a lot of that impulsivity produced some pretty amazing
Yeah.
experiences. But in terms of the business ideas, once I realized how hard it was going to be to actually do it, to start a small business, I would abandon the project and
Yeah.
then switch to something else. So I'm sure she thought I was going to do that.
Yeah.
And this one came to fruition.
Well, and I'm so glad it did. So, but that being said, it's not like you can just do Aquamation, and we're going to get into Aquamation, what it is, but you also had to make it is your Enswell is a full-fledged funeral home. So it wasn't like you could just do the Aquamation piece. I mean, you kind of created a whole funeral home, a green
Right.
field.
So we bought the machine. I
Hmm.
didn't know where I was going to put it. 2022 was a new level of hell, right? It
Yes.
was awful. So we had to name the company, generate the content, figure out who we are and what we were offering and why we were doing this, especially without a background in the industry. But I think we intuited early on this was an opportunity to help people.
Mhm.
We're all going to die at some point, and we all run from it in different ways and don't think about it. I ran from the idea of death after my father died when I was 22. I literally not only tuned out his death, I stopped thinking of him, and he was my best friend.
Yeah.
So
It
in
was a
some
coping
way,
mechanism, probably.
yeah, and in some
Yeah.
way, this was coming full circle to that. I'm immersed in it, and we have an opportunity to offer something unique and different for the community and help people, and it's better for the environment. So yeah,
Yes.
we bought the
Win-win.
machine, we bought a building in Hillsboro. I flew to Las Vegas to train on the machine. It's not like it's at the Ripley's Museum, believe it or not, right? It just there happened to be a funeral home out there that would offer training. And when they brought out the first body at the funeral home, I nearly passed out. I'd only seen my father's body very briefly after he died, and I was overwhelmed. And then I got used to it,
Mhm.
and
And you see it as a beautiful
yeah,
service. As
yeah.
somebody who ran memory assisted livings, memory cares, independent livings for 20 years, I saw a lot of people pass away. And I found the process of that very comforting. Somebody who has had an amazing life. Now, of course, you see probably people that also are passed away too young, but there is such a sol the death process is beautiful. It can be, and
Yeah.
so wonderful.
And
Well, let's
so much of our attention is to the family,
yeah.
right? Because you become acutely aware when you're around a dead body that whatever you believe in, the soul or consciousness, it's not there anymore. And we treat the bodies with great respect. We shroud them in cotton or silk, cotton for green burial, silk for aquamation. We shroud often with the family, but principally what we're doing is taking care of the family
I
in
love
every way
that.
we can.
Yes, I love that. So let's get into it. What is aquamation?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, so the easy way, the simplest way of framing it is that it's just an environmentally friendly alternative to fire cremation. But that's not really enough, right? Because most people are like, well, how does it work? What do you mean water cremation? How do you cremate with water? And I will note that the funeral industry has crafted a thick veil where you don't really know what's going on behind closed doors in the back room. People don't walk into most funeral homes and ask, how does embalming work? How do they make room for the embalming fluid?
You kind
How
of
does
just hand over
cremation
your
work?
loved one and don't ask questions. It's just
Right,
a
right.
practice that's been
So
done for years and years. Yeah, I
What's
get it.
what's interesting about aquamation is that people are curious. We all have a tendency to scrutinize something new and different more than the thing we think we're familiar with. So we get all of these questions about how the process works. And initially it was difficult because most people are not used to talking about death and dying and disposition, decomposition. I mean, it's some gross stuff actually, but what's interesting about it is it ends up opening the door for other conversations about death and dying and end of life planning and how you want to be treated at end of life, what medical intervention you do and do not want, medical aid in dying. So it's so interesting that something as simple as talking about how aquamation works can open the door to talk about everything else
Love that.
end of
Yeah, and
life
you're 100%
related.
correct.
So I'll tell you how it works, but in the context of cremation, right? So when we die, the soft tissue will start to break down, right? With green burial, it's going to decompose slowly, gradually in the soil. With embalming, you're going to preserve the soft tissue so it doesn't readily decompose. And with fire cremation, you're burning it off, right? The body is placed into a cremation chamber. It's heated to 1800 degrees, and that soft tissue would essentially go up through the chimney in the form of soot, toxic, and carcinogenic gases. So, aquamation is environmentally friendly because we're not burning the body, we're not releasing carbon or toxic or carcinogenic gases. What we're doing with aquamation is circulating an alkaline solution, water and potassium hydroxide, 5% potassium hydroxide, around the body for about 4 to 6 hours, and it accomplishes the same goal as fire cremation. It's just at much lower temperatures. So it's considered a gentler process. We actually return 30% more bone remains
Mhm.
because it's gentler and because we don't lose any to the chimney effect of the
Got it.
crematory.
Okay. So when you say a green burial, kind of going back to that, is that
Yeah.
when you don't get embalmed and you just
Yeah.
get buried? Okay. So the practice of embalming is truly for people to be able to view the body. Would you say that that's
Well,
why did
really, prior to the Civil War in the U.S., we didn't embalm our dead. We cared for them at home. We left the body out in the parlor in the
oh
family
for the
home.
viewing?
The community would come, family and friends. They'd pay their respects. There'd be a home funeral. The pallbearers would carry the body shrouded in a family quilt or in a pine casket that Uncle Bob built down to the lower 40 and bury on the family farm, or they'd bury in a church cemetery or a community cemetery. And in during the Civil War, Union soldiers were dying in the South. The railroads refused to transport their bodies up north because they were decomposing. So Abraham Lincoln ordered that, if feasible, their bodies be embalmed with creosote, alcohol, turpentine, and arsenic.
Oh,
So these field
poison.
embalmers, yeah, yeah, these field embalmers would embalm the bodies of dead Union soldiers so the
Oh my God.
railway would take them back up north. And after the Civil War, this took off as a cultural practice. If you really loved Aunt Bessie, you'd preserve her. And you wouldn't have Uncle Bob build a simple pine box. You might have a more ornate box built.
And we are definitely going to
Um,
get into that piece of the
now,
funeral. Yeah.
I
So,
will note though, it really early on, funeral homes did not have refrigeration, so it did allow families to delay the
so people could
funeral.
get there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but now in 2025, every funeral home has refrigeration. In most circumstances, you don't need to embalm at all. We can hold a body in refrigeration for 2 weeks without any visible signs of deterioration and still have a viewing or a funeral. So for most families, it's just an unnecessary expense, and it's very invasive and traumatic on the body. Some people would say, well, they're dead. What does it matter? Other people, though, it's still it's
Yeah.
important to them.
And that's part of this, like taking down the veil, is we
Right.
just assume embalming has to be done. Like,
Right.
no questions
Families
asked.
and communities lost control over caring for the deceased. And we now trust the funeral homes, this
Yeah.
modern billion-dollar industry, to guide us through the process. But there are a lot of misconceptions. People don't know their rights as consumers. They don't know that they don't need to have the body embalmed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so interesting. So going back to Aquamation, so of course, for me, as soon as I heard it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing." And I can think about people in my life who are very, environmentally friendly and like, why? So, what are there any downsides of Aquamation? Like, why isn't it just, exploding, or is it exploding as a practice? Why would somebody still not choose Aquamation when they're kind of
Sure.
presented with that?
I think, in some circumstances, what we encounter, it's in someone's will that they're going to be cremated.
Oh, and they never talked
They,
about
yeah,
aquamation.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they have a healthcare power of attorney that
yeah.
conveys disposition rights, and they mention cremation. And I think my shirt says water cremation. The Cremation Association of North America does classify aquamation as a type of cremation. So,
Okay.
a healthcare power of attorney or next of kin could easily make this decision for their loved one. But really, it's newer, right? There are only
Yeah.
35 aquamation facilities in the US. It's legal in 31 states, but
Oh, that was going to be one of my
even
questions. So only 31. So there are some states where it's not legal
but not necessarily because like,
of
oh
anything
no, this
wrong. Right.
shouldn't be legal. It's just that a funeral home hasn't approached the funeral board about legalizing it
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
So it's not on the radar of the consumer when they go to their local funeral home in a little town in the Midwest. It's not available. They've
Right.
never heard of it before. So
Yeah.
it's slowly taking off. I mean, when we opened, we helped zero people the first month. And then it was a couple months before we started helping two and then three. And now we're helping 20 families a month who are choosing Aquamation. So it's getting out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But you
love it.
ask why people wouldn't choose it. I think 80% of people who come to us for cremation, because we also do offer cremation now that we're a full funeral home. I would say about 80% of people switch to aquamation, but there are certain cultural and religious practices that make, cremation a better fit. Most of the Hindu families we work with choose cremation because it's more similar to burning the body on a funeral pyre as
Got
they
it.
would do in
Yeah.
India. And then the Catholic Church still, for the most part, opposes aquamation. Many Catholic priests oppose cremation still. So
Mhm.
this is an anachronistic industry resistant to change. I think some religious groups have met this with some scrutiny, but they'll probably come around to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Once they, it's better for the environment. Which is a cornerstone of a lot of, religious organizations. So
Yeah.
once they,
And
so let's,
honestly,
yeah.
it is gentler. You do return 30% more remains. And I think one thing we've noted is that there's so much cultural and religious symbolism of water with peace and tranquility, rebirth, the baptism. I thought we would only be helping the hippy dippy Prius driving, organic food eating, and that's me and my family, right?
Yeah.
Not talking smack. I thought that would be the demographic, and it is, but we also have people who are Southern Baptists, and they're like, I just can't shake the idea of cremation, and hell and damnation. And water cremation is like the baptism. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, this is just a very personal choice. Traditional burial, green burial, cremation, aquamation. It's really just another option for the consumer that helps them just in a tiny way honor what their loved one would have wanted or approach their own death with some intentionality
Yeah.
and makes them have a little more control over it.
I love
So
it. Control is my thing. So I love that. And I think what you just said really struck a chord with me because for some people who would not choose cremation because of their thoughts about burning, for whatever reason, it's the only other option until now was really burial. So it gives them kind of another option that feels better for them. I love it.
yeah,
So let's dive into because I know one of the biggest things ends well, and you, Hunter, are big on, and I love it. It speaks to me is like I said, taking down the veil of the funeral home business, but
right.
also the cost of dying and
Yeah.
who absorbs that and why is it so much. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about, why is it so expensive? What could we do to not follow, feel obligated to follow some of these practices that have been going on forever that maybe are not needed. So
Right.
please talk about that.
Yeah, it's really tough. When we opened, I really thought I was going to encounter all of these sleazy, slimy, unscrupulous funeral directors engaging in predatory and extractive practices and upselling and those people exist in this industry like they do in any industry. But for the most part, I've encountered people who really care about the work that they do. This is not a high-paying job, and it's often 60 hours a week. You're taking on a lot of trauma from other people. I've mostly met really kind, caring, compassionate people in this. And so I thought I was going up against this behemoth of an industry that's just got people over a barrel and they're extracting money from them. And then what I encountered was that the consumer is driving a lot of this in terms of what they want with the burial. Burial is expensive. You've got all these moving parts, a cemetery plot that'll be cared for in perpetuity, someone to open and close a grave. Most cemeteries require a concrete vault. You've got to have a vault company come in and set a concrete vault. You've got to lower the casket, close it. Maybe the funeral home is charged for embalming. There might be a graveside service with tents and chairs for 150 people, a police escort after a funeral at a funeral home. And when you compare a funeral at a funeral home to an event space in Durham, event spaces are expensive,
Mhm.
weddings are expensive. And the reality is that the costs can go up significantly when you're talking about burial. There's so much to coordinate. So I nerded out recently on the cost of dying in the US, and I didn't encounter what I thought I was going to. In the 1950s, a burial and a funeral was about $700. Today it's about $9,000. And that sounds like a big increase, but when you punch in 700 to an inflation calculator, you get exactly $9,000.
Okay.
As it turns out, it hasn't gone up any more than bread and milk and eggs. Well, eggs, never mind.
Yeah,
Eggs are
I was
eggs are
gonna
through
make
the roof.
a comment too.
Um, so it's actually not going up any more than the inflation rate. And if anything, the cost of dying, the cost of disposition has tanked because of the proliferation of high volume crematoriums. In 1950, the cremation rate was 3%. Now it's around 60%. So if you were dying in the 1950s or you had a loved one who died, you probably didn't have an option for cremation. Now you do, and you can get a cremation all in for $1,000 to $1,500.
Okay.
And I guess really, as I've explored this, I think that the reality, the sad fact is that if you can't afford $1,000 to $1,500 for a cremation, the issue is not funeral poverty, it's just poverty.
Hmm.
It's 725 minimum wage that hasn't been raised since 2009. It's 100 million people in the US living paycheck to paycheck, an egregious disparity in the distribution of wealth, declining middle class. People can't afford an amount of money that's their rent payment for 1 month that they weren't expecting. We get calls all the time, and people can't afford our cremation cost. We refer them out. We don't want to leave them high and dry. We try to find an option that'll work. And when we tell them that there's another option for $1,500, they can't afford that.
Yeah.
It's really tough. And the reality is the cost of burial is immense.
Okay.
Um,
So that's good to know that what we're
yeah.
being charged is pretty accurate. And what you found as kind of a newbie in this space where you
Well, I
almost
will
thought it
I will
was. Yeah.
say, the consumer has rights. Like the
Mhm.
consumer doesn't need to purchase a $5,000 casket from the funeral home, or a $10,000 casket. The consumer can order a casket online.
Costco, right?
Yep. For $1,000, $2,000 and have it shipped directly to the funeral home. And they can save thousands of dollars in doing that. They can decline embalming. They can have a memorial service instead of a funeral service. And they can do that at any place of their choosing, at the home, at a park, at a brewery or a
Ooh,
restaurant.
yeah.
And so there are definitely ways of saving within this
Okay.
industry.
Okay, good to know. So, one of the things, especially where we live, in Durham, North Carolina, which has a lot of hospitals, obviously universities. When we talk about donating our body, what does that look like? Or, can we still donate our body and then it comes back and gets aquamation after, or how? Talk to
Yeah,
us about.
yeah. So there are a couple options with donating your body. There is a body farm in Cullowhee, North Carolina. The first in the US, I think, opened in 1981 in Knoxville, and you actually donate your body and it's left out, and forensic pathologists study how the body breaks down. So they're studying it for research purposes, and it really is a gift to the community. But it is free. They cover all costs. Now, in those with body farms, the family does not get back an urn. The other much more common and well-known form of body donation is an anatomical gift program. Locally, we have UNC, Duke, Eastern Carolina University, and Elon. You donate your body for medical research. They cover all costs of cremation.
Okay.
Cremation is cremation can be run on a high volume level in a way that Aquamation can't. It's how we with Aquamation ensure there's no cross contamination with other people's ashes. When you really need the lowest cost option or a high volume option, cremation is going to be better for that. So
Okay.
invariably, the anatomical gift programs work with a low cost cremation provider,
Got
but
it.
they cover all expenses and it's a gift to
A
the
gift.
community. You
When
you
I
do have to
ran,
register in advance.
yeah, when I memory cares for 20 years, I had a lot of my residents who had donated their brains.
Yeah.
So after they passed, we had a procedure we had to do, and
Yeah.
then when the funeral home came, they knew also what to do because
Great.
yep,
So I'll note, you can just do brain donation,
yep,
which very often involves, let's say death occurs in the hospital or at hospice. We come and pick someone up. We take them into our care here at Inswell, and then we work with a pathologist who's a part of the brain program that they're enrolled in. So that's one option, and then we just proceed as we would normally with
okay,
Aquamation. People often confuse organ donation with anatomical gift
true,
programs. Very different. With organ donation, you really can't have any break in respiration, in oxygenation of the organs. They have to be intact and healthy. Typically, someone will die in the hospital or in an accident. They're kept alive on life support until their organs can be harvested, which is the term they
yeah.
use in the industry. And then they would come to the funeral home after that. But with full body anatomical gift donation, you're donating your full body for medical research. They're handling all
Good
aspects of
stuff.
disposition.
Got it. Okay. So one of the last things I want to talk about, because one of the things I also love about Enswell is how invested you are in education for the community, but also being there as a support to the community. So I wanted you to be able to touch on what you all do as a death cafe.
Yeah.
And what is it? Why should people come? And, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I guess what we realized early on, right, and this was a huge learning experience for us, right? No background in the industry. What we realized is that these funeral homes do play a critical role in our community. They're open 365 days a year. There's no such thing as a holiday, as a snowstorm, as a tornado warning. We are ready for whatever life and death might throw our way. But there was no engagement with these funeral homes outside of that narrow window when you needed them. What
Mhm.
about end of life planning workshops and yoga classes and meditation groups and grief groups? What about engaging with the community decades before they might need a funeral home and after they've needed the funeral home? So we've approached Inswell and the community with this heavy push for community outreach, community involvement. And that's been huge for us. And that's really the most meaningful aspect of what we do, the community engagement. So we have death cafes every month. They were so popular we had to start two.
Okay.
The death cafe movement started in 2011 in the UK and then made it to the US in 2012. There have now been over 20,000 death cafes in 93 countries, and it is a social franchise. People get together and they have open and honest conversations about death, dying, end of life planning. They share tips and tricks for cost savings when working with the funeral home. They talk about assisted suicide, right to die, caring for a partner with a neurodegenerative condition. Sky's the limit. It's not a grief group. It's just an opportunity for people to come together and have open and honest conversations about death and dying. And we had 52 people come to our funeral home in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and we had that was too many, so we now have two per month.
That's amazing. I know I
Yeah,
need
it's
to get
great.
myself there. I'm right down the street. And it goes with the whole theme of openly aging as well as like we got to talk about these things. We've got to not make it so taboo, death and dying. I mean, we're all going to be there one day,
Yeah.
hopefully a long time from now, but we just don't know. And so I love that. So Hunter, how can people find Ends Well? What do you want people to know about Ends Well? And here's your time. Tell us everything you want us to know.
Yeah, I guess, we we kind of put in our branding this idea of concierge care, right? You find that in any industry, like quality HVAC, concierge electrical group, but the reality is that Veronica and I run Inswell 24/7. When people call us at 2 in the morning, we don't use a call service. Veronica and I shoot out of bed. The experts in green burial, anatomical gift, aquamation, we're the ones who have already met the family here at Inswell. We've gone and met our clients at a hospice facility at Duke Hawk Pavilion or UNC Secu House. We don't feel comfortable outsourcing that call to someone else. So, we are there at every step of the way for our families. We hand deliver urns and death certificates to our families. We don't put ashes in a cardboard or plastic box and have the family come here in a last ditch effort to upsell them on a mass produced urn. We have 300 urns made by local artists,
I love
and
that.
and we don't tell our families, we don't even encourage them to buy an urn. At the time of death, that's not necessarily the right time to buy an urn. That's why we include this eco-friendly bamboo urn with our service. But yeah, our goal is to not be the traditional funeral home with maroon carpet and floral wallpaper
That's so
and
true.
Reader's Digest
The
on the
gold,
church
the
pew.
brass everywhere.
Yeah, I think the reality is that when the demographic we're helping, when they walk into the traditional funeral home and they see the golden leaf floral designs, it's kind of and the fake plants. The
Yes.
plants are often fake. It feels fake, faux grandeur, like look at me in my $100,000 hearse. It just doesn't resonate with the community that we're helping. And I think people like that they can take ownership of their legacy and choose an option that reflects their values, something that's eco-friendly and that's new and that's different. And that feels empowering in a way that working with the traditional funeral home doesn't. And that's really the most meaningful aspect of this, that we're offering something unique and different to honor a unique life.
Yeah.
And that may be in an urn made by a local artist, or just the fact that we offer green burial and aquamation, or that people who have worked with us attend a yoga class or a grief group years after, we've helped them for their loved one.
Yeah. I love
Yeah,
it. Well, thank you so much. I will definitely have all your links. I know you guys are just busy. You're out there, I love it. And so I'll have all your links in the thing, but I so appreciate you taking the time to be on this channel. I love that you all are right here for me. And I talk about it all the time. Like, have you ever heard of Aquamation? I learned about it this year. I think it's amazing.
yeah,
So thank you, Hunter. I appreciate you being
yeah,
here today.
yeah.
Yes. And thank you everyone for joining. It was so exciting to finally have Hunter here. I've been wanting to do that for a long time. So make sure you remember that aging is a universal issue, but your aging journey is 100% unique to you. So get yourself educated, keep control, and live a life of purpose. So thank you, everyone. All right. Oh, man.